Jacob Glanville is the CEO of Centivax and Distributed Bio. He's currently working on a COVID-19 treatment, and you may recognize him from the Netflix documentary Pandemic: How to Prevent an Outbreak. Dr. Glanville, it's good to have you back on the show. Just as far as the news of the day on vaccines, before we get to your treatment, what's your level of confidence at this point, given some of the early responses we've seen so far, that we will get an effective vaccine by the end of the year?
Well, it's definitely good news. We know at this point that the vaccines are eliciting antibodies in the recipients. And while we still need to complete the trials, the smart money is we should be cautiously optimistic. And that's because we know that hamsters and primates, when they have antibodies, they're protected from the virus, and these vaccines are eliciting antibodies. So I think it's fair to say that we have a good chance of having effective vaccines by the end of this year.
We'll talk about your hamsters in just a moment, but just on the vaccine front, is there a way for these scientists and doctors to test how long the vaccine will protect people? It seems like we're not going to know that until we start administering it in the fall or winter.
Yeah, unfortunately, the only way to know that is to watch these people. The closest you can do is you can look at the type of vaccine that the different companies have chosen, and you can compare to other uses of that same technology. If you're using an RNA vaccine versus a pseudovirion particle, those kinds of technologies might have a certain characteristic amount of time that the person has immunity. But ultimately, we just have to watch those patients and find out.
Dr. Glanville, if we look at just the last week or so, Moderna, BioNTech, and AstraZeneca, are there any one of those three whose data really stands out to you as being the best? And is this going to be a sort of winner-takes-all type market when we do get a successful vaccine that's approved? Yeah,
so they had actually surprisingly similar results in that they all show antibodies being elicited. And on top of that, they all showed some side effects, so fever and some kind of flu-like symptoms that seem to happen. That is a good sign because it means that you're getting a response to the vaccine, although people don't really like it so much. Between the three different vaccines, I don't want to give people too much advice one over the other. I do like the pseudovirion particles, the Oxford-style technology, because it elicits T-cell responses as well. But we know from the animal studies that antibodies are enough by themselves. So hopefully all three are successful, and then it's just going to be convenience and effectiveness that ultimately will cause one of these to become more prevalent.
Let's talk about the research you've been doing on your antibody treatments. When are you going to be testing it in humans? And what's the difference between what you're doing, say, and what Regeneron is doing? A lot of hope for their antibody cocktail to also be used as a treatment.
That's right. So in addition to the vaccines, which are definitely good news, we need a therapy. And the reason for that is that even if the vaccines start becoming available in 2021, first off, it's going to take many months to vaccinate large swaths of the population. We know that Dr. Fauci has indicated we never have a perfect vaccine, so it won't work in everybody. And we know 20 to 50% of Americans may not take the vaccine. So for all of those people, they might still get sick, and they're going to need something at the hospital to treat them. Antibodies are a potent way to provide treatment for these kinds of viruses. We think Regeneron's method hopefully will be successful. And the differences of our antibodies versus theirs is we've done some additional engineering to increase safety. Hopefully both medicines are successful and they're available to treat patients by the end of the year.
Dr. Glanville, clearly U.S. cases have spiked pretty aggressively over the course of the last 2 or 3 months, but deaths haven't followed, nowhere near to the same scale, which is great. Why do you think that is, and should we be confident that that will continue for the next 6 months until we do have a vaccine?
Unfortunately, there's a lag. When you see a spike in cases, you can wait 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and you're going to see a big spike in deaths as well, and that we're starting to see that happen. What I've said repeatedly, I will continue to anticipate a series of waves where we'll start to see large spikes in cases. Once that starts hitting hospitals, people increase social distancing measures and other social isolation measures, and then that'll slow the wave. And we're just going to keep seeing this sort of behavior until we have good vaccines and good therapies.
Just back to the antibody therapy for a second, because a lot of people, I know a lot of doctors do hail this as a potential game changer bridge to the vaccine. Are you looking at using this to just treat severe patients, as we've seen some of these antivirals, or could this be used preventatively as sort of a temporary vaccine until we get the real thing?
Yeah, so I actually see it as larger than just a stopgap measure. Because there's a large enough part of the population that the vaccine may not work for or they don't take it, we could be in a position of a year or more of the virus continuing to undergo large-scale outbreaks. having a therapy, so have an antibody you can offer people at the hospital, it's like an antiviral. If they receive it and they get better and go home, then the virus is no longer as scary. It's no longer as dangerous to get sick. That you can give antibodies to people who are sick. The earlier you give them, the better the effect is. We've learned this from Ebola and other nasty viruses, and that appears to be the case here as well, as far as we can tell. But you can also give antibodies as a prophylactic or a preventative to at-risk populations like the immunocompromised or the elderly or hospital workers or the military.
Dr. Glanville, just to go back to the cases and the deaths, we should have done, Sarah, we should have done 2 follow-ups in a row each rather than yo-yoing like this for poor Dr. Glanville. Anyway, back to the prospects of where we're heading on that front. Do you think weather getting worse in the fall will be a big swing factor? Not necessarily so much on the deaths front, but maybe on that area too, but on the cases front, given that might push some of this new economic activity we've been able to enjoy over the last 2 or 3 months indoors rather than outdoors?
It's a little hard to say. My expectation is that as we see an increase in cases that affect hospitals, then local policies will change. The good news is that this is the second time we've gone through this cycle, so we're all a little bit more experienced on implementing those policies. The problem, of course, is that people are exasperated. So I'm expecting to see some worsening as we go into the fall, but this is going to be our second and potentially even third wave by the end of the year, and that's going to help us try to mitigate the damage until the medicines are ready.